Then, hello everyone here in Zoom and on the live streams. Welcome to our 6th chit-chat session on hearing this time. For everyone who's watching, please share our streams with your friends who cannot be here today with us on Zoom or with us on Zoom. So share the live streams so that more people get the chance to learn something new. And for everyone here in Zoom, very glad you joined us today. We would kindly ask you to keep yourself muted until the question and answer session. And we would love if you turn on your cameras, because this gives our speakers a nicer atmosphere to not talk to black squares, but to people. And let's quickly go through our agenda. We're already in the middle of it. I'll tell you a little bit more about 15 times 4 now. Then we'll quickly jump into our talk today about hearing. And after the talk, we will have plenty of time for all of your questions and hopefully also answers that you can ask afterwards. And we're happy to have the questions. So what is 15 times 4 Munich? We exist since 2017, and our motto is sharing knowledge for people by people. So experienced people like Andrej, for example, come and present their expertise to you, and we will make it understandable and accessible for you. So this is one of our main ideas, to share knowledge that is accessible and understandable, that is factful, and we also value as a community very much. 15 times 4 is actually not only here in Munich, but in more than 20 different cities across Europe and South Asia. Maybe you had the chance to get a glance at this last month with our Nobel Prize events, but as the pandemic is worldwide, all of them mainly are going online now, so you will have the opportunity to see talks of them also if you have a look for 15 times 4 around the world. And with this, I already come to our speaker of today. Andrej is a doctoral candidate at the Bio-Inspired Information Processing Unit at Technical University in Munich. And he's actually a physicist by training. And his passion for playing the violin and for music in general always made him wonder how hearing actually works. And so this is how he ended up in this unit, where they are studying how the ear works and how hearing works to help build or improve cochlear implants. And with this, I would love to give the voice to you, Andrej. I'll stop sharing my screen, and it's your time to go.
Andrej, please unmute yourself.
Can you understand me right now?
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you for the nice introduction. I want to take you to a trip tonight to hearing, how the physics behind hearing works and how our bodies are able to perceive these sounds. And for that, I want you to imagine that you are in a jungle right now, because hearing evolved in animals to receive information from our natural surrounding. And I want to take you to these sounds that our ears were used to the last millions of years. Well, as you heard, hearing is very interesting because one can distinguish the sounds coming from multiple objects in a matter of seconds. You can tell the difference between a roaring monkey or a chanting bird. You immediately know from which direction the sound came from. And often you can even tell the mood of the creature that generated the sound. And if you understand how subtle these sounds are and how sensitive our ears have to be in order to sense them, you will think of hearing as something even more astonishing than magic. Okay, every hearing person knows how hearing feels like, but what is sound? Well, the physics behind sound is mostly pressure. That's one of the concepts that is most important to understand how sound works. And for that, I want you to imagine you hold a syringe in your hand. You clock the exit of the syringe with one of your fingers. You push in the piston half the way. And what happens? Well, you will sense a certain force, a pressure on your fingertip. And this pressure is higher the reduction in volume is. So if you halve the volume, you will double the pressure. And when a loudspeaker plays a sound, something very similar will happen. Imagine, for example, this sound speaker on the one side and the ear on the other side, and you have air between it. And all the air particles are more or less uniformly distributed along this path. We can say that the atmospheric pressure is constant along all this path. What happens if a sound is played? Well, when a sound is played, the loudspeaker will start to move, and this movement will create a compression of the volume right in front of it. And this compressed slice of air will then start to relax by compressing neighboring slices of air. And the continuous repetition of this process will result in a wave spreading away from its source and eventually, for example, to an ear. And such a sound has two key characteristics. One characteristic is the sound pressure. So if we take a look at the point where our ear sits, then we will see that the before constant atmospheric pressure is now changing. And the amplitude or the strength of this changing is called the sound pressure. We measure the sound pressure in decibel sound pressure level. It's a complicated term, but it is an objective way of telling how loud a sound pressure wave is. And the other key characteristic is the frequency. It is the number of wave fronts hitting the ear per second, and we measure it in hertz. Hertz basically means just per second. And the frequency is related to the pitch we perceive. So the higher the frequency, the higher the perceived pitch. So sound pressure is the deviation from the ambient pressure. But how big is this deviation? For this, I want to take you to a thought experiment. For example, you hold, again, a syringe in your hand, but this time the syringe is huge. I'm talking about a really huge syringe of 12,000 kilometer length. And now imagine you again clock the exit with one of your fingers, but this time you push in the piston only by 1 millimeter compared to the length of 12,000 kilometer. Will you be able to feel the force on your finger? No, definitely not. But your ears could, because at the softest hearable sound, the pressure changes by 1/10 of a billionth. And that's in proportion the same as our thought experiment. So if you think of your ear canal of the syringe and a headphone that is plugged into the ear canal is moved, yeah, you have the same proportion. And I want to emphasize how great this is, because this means we have a detection device in our head that is able to sense pressure changes of the ambient pressure by 1/10 of a billionth. But there is a drawback, it only works for certain frequencies. And to understand what a frequency really means, I want to play a tone of 440 Hertz to you. That's a single frequency. The wave shape is depicted here. And if you increase the frequency, for example, double it, you will receive a higher pitch tone. And accordingly, the wave shape also changes. It has double the peaks because There, you doubled the frequency. These are very fundamental tones, and usually sound is more than just frequency. Sound is, for example, what I talk to you now, my speech. Therefore, I recorded the word check for you. And I plotted here the wave shape of that word, at least a part of that word. And as you can see, it's not easy to tell anymore which frequency is had, because it has not a well-defined wave in the sense that you can just count the wave peaks to get the frequency. And why is that? Well, sound in general consists of many, many frequencies. And if you add them up, you get a more complex wave shape or wave pattern. Therefore, we define a tone is a special case of sound, and every sound consists of tones, even speech. So again, sound consists of several frequencies, tones are just exactly one frequency. And we can exploit that. For example, if you take a piano and now you attach a motor on each of the piano keys and you attach it to a computer and let the computer play the piano in a very special way, you would be even able to produce speech. So listen to that and take a look on the subtitles, otherwise it's hard. Responsible for saving and protecting our mother earth. So what happened here? We played single tones very fast, several simultaneously, and ended up in a sound that sounded like speech. And this works because every sound consists of fundamental, of tones, of many, many frequencies. So what we learned now is the physics behind sound generation. But what about the perception? How does the ear work? For that, let's take a look at the anatomy of the ear. When a sound arrives at the ear, it gets funneled by the pinna into the ear channel, and the sound will then eventually hit the tympanic membrane. And the arriving wave peaks, they will bring the tympanic membrane into movement, which is conducted via the ossicles to the cochlea. The cochlea is a snailed structure, it's coiled up, but for the sake of simplicity, I want to uncoil it. You have to know that the cochlea is the interesting part of the ear that generates the signals for the brain. So all the magic of hearing actually happens here. And how does it work? Well, the sound wave is entering at this oval window. The sound wave will then travel up to the end, turn around, and go back, and will exit at the round window here. Let's zoom further in. So the sound wave enters, it goes to the end, and then it goes around and back out through the round window. So this is the normal case if a sound wave is too low to be heard, because the frequency is too low to be perceived. But something very, very interesting happens if the sound wave is within the audible range, because with the right frequency, the sound will take a shortcut through the so-called basilar membrane. The basilar membrane is a wall that is inside the cochlea, where for too low sounds, the sound has to go around, but with the right frequency, it will get compliant for that frequency at a specific location and create a shortcut for the sound. We can take a look on the basilar membrane from above, and we will see that at the entrance of the cochlea, the basilar membrane is narrow and thick and stiff, whereas at the other end, it is wide and thin and a little bit soft, at least soft compared to the entrance. So if a sound of, for example, 1 kHz is played, it will create a shortcut exactly at this position and then create a vibration pattern on the membrane that looks a little bit like this here. When you play a 5 kHz tone, something similar will happen, but at a different location. And if you play 2 sounds simultaneously, well, you get both at the same time. So you can think of the basilar membrane as a sort of an instrument that has different tones and different locations, just like a xylophone. which has a tone in each of its segments. And this is a little bit like the basilar membrane. Well, each tone has its place on the basilar membrane. But the question is now, how does the corresponding segment exactly know to which frequency it has to respond? There is one that the membrane itself has this mechanical property at the location, but there is more, because on the membrane, we have an organ which is very, very thin and consists only at each location of a few cells. Let's zoom in into this organ. So here we see this organ of 𝗁𝗂𝗺𝗵, and it consists of different types of cells. Here are the two most important, at least most important to me. For example, the inner hair cell, which is a little bit like a microphone because it catches up, it senses the vibrations from the sound and translates them into electrical signals that go to the brain. So if this hair cell is firing, the brain will know, yeah, there is a tone of 1 𝗁𝗺𝗵 playing, because it's the inner hair cell that sits at the location of 1 𝗁𝗺𝗵. So this one generates signals. But what about the other ones? We have 3 of them at each location for each frequency. And they have a unique ability because they can dance. Yeah, the outer hair cells are very nice fellas, because if they perceive a sound, they will start moving. And by that, they will generate even more sound. They will actually amplify the incoming sound by a factor of 1,000. Without them, it's really hard to hear. You would be basically deaf. And it's very important to know that these cells are very fragile. So when they amplify the sound, something bad can happen. If the sound wave is too strong, they can break. Just like a wine glass, when you play the right frequency with a too loud amplitude, then the glass will break. And this happens as well to your hair cells. I can show that to you. For example, if you have a microscope, electron microscope picture of the organ of 𝗁𝗁𝗺𝗺 from above, you see here on the left side the inner hair cells, and here again the 3 rows of outer hair cells. Well, when you play too loud noises, they can die, and it will look like that. These are damaged hair cells who are ultimately dead. And they won't regrow, because all the hair cells you have, they were generated in the womb of your mother, when you were in the womb of your mother. So please take care of your hair cells and avoid loud noise levels. There is a rough estimate on which noise levels can be dangerous, and it is said everything above 80 to 85 dBs is okay for a long time. This on the very low side, for example, leaf rustling, soft music, or a vacuum cleaner as well. But as soon as it becomes as loud as a noisy restaurant or heavy traffic, then you have to pay attention. Then you can really say the longer you're exposed to the sound, the more hair cells you will kill. And in the end, you will become deaf, or at least deaf in certain frequency ranges, like older people who usually lose their high frequency hearing. So the next time you go into the woods, think of the stuff you just learned right now, how interesting, how amazing the sound hearing really works, and pay attention, because these cells won't regrow. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Andrej. You can, yeah, perfect. Stop sharing your screen. And then this throws us right into the question and answer session. Before we start, let me quickly give you a short introduction on how we will do this. So if you have a question to ask for Andrej, you can raise your hand. And how you do this is you click on participants or Teilnehmer or whichever language you use, zoom in, and then you can see on the right side there is this hand signal that you can click, and then I will call you out and you will be able to ask your question to Andrej. If you're too shy to speak to us or don't have a good sound quality or whatever, you can also ask your question in the chat here in Zoom. You find the symbol also on the bottom of your Zoom window. And to all of our listeners in the live streams, you can also ask your questions in the chat there, and Antonius will deliver them to us here, and I'll ask Andrej for you. So if you have any questions, you may speak up now. I can also start with a short one, hopefully. So Andrej, you said that older people lose their high frequency cells first. Why is this the case? Why do they leave us first?
To be honest, I'm not 100% sure on that, but what I heard from it, which is a little bit intuitive, is the fact that if you imagine the basilar membrane as we depicted it before, then the higher frequencies lie towards the entrance of the cochlea. So every sound, even the low sounds, will pass through the high frequency range. And if the amplitudes or the sound pressures are too high, then they can break these structures. So because high frequency, every frequency is passed through the high frequency range, probably this is the reason. But I'm not very sure on that, to be honest.
Well, that's something to start with. And Lily is not able to find her raise hand button. You need to go down to participants and then click raise hand, but it's also fine like this, and you can ask your question.
Hi, Andrej. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was really interesting, even though I cannot find my raise hand button. But anyway, I have a question. My mom suffers from hearing, so she had some problems when she was young. So probably her ear cells are all destroyed. And she usually complains of a lot of background noise, which makes it harder for her to hear. And then I was searching for some options, and I found these silicone things that you put, silicone rings that you put in your ears, and that they claim that they help reduce noise. Is this true, and how does this actually work?
So I don't know exactly about this product, but it sounds like that they will block certain frequency ranges. So it's like an earplug, probably designed like an earplug that lets only the frequencies important for speech through, so that noises that are disturbing the speech understanding are blocked. So they can really focus on the information that is on the speech information in the sound.
Thank you.
If we're already there, is this like, how do noise cancelling headphones work? Do you know?
Yeah, noise cancelling headphones are a very nice thing because they show that sound can not only be generated, but also sort of destroyed. If you remember, for example, our loudspeaker that moved through the air and generated a compression volume. What would happen if you have a second loudspeaker right next to it, which moves into the same direction? And this will actually neglect the pressure generated by the first loudspeaker. So what it does is it generates actually a sound that is inverse to the other sound. And when you add them up, they will destroy each other. So what a headphone does is, a noise cancelling headphone, it measures the incoming sound and instantaneously plays a sound that is the inverse of the incoming sound. And by that, the summation is 0 and you don't hear anything. But in fact, what happens is that sound is generated in the opposite direction as well. So outside, there is probably a measurable signal. So the energy is not destroyed. This is what I wanted to tell for all the physicists out there. The energy is never destroyed, but the amplitude at a certain location is destroyed.
Okay, cool. I actually thought it must be something about frequencies, as yeah.
As a fun fact, you can take, for example, two loudspeakers, stereo loudspeakers, and play the same signal to both, and you will hear double the loudness or double the sound pressure because you have two speakers. But if you now take the chords, the leads going to one of the speakers and turn them around, so the plus is minus and minus is plus, you will get the inverse sound signal on one loudspeaker and the right one on the other one. And when they hit each other, they will become zero. And that's a very fun thing because it means if you turn on the other loudspeaker, everything becomes quieter in the focus of the loudspeakers. So you can really destroy sounds by playing the inverse of it.
Physics are incredible. So John has a question. Please go for it.
Hi, can you hear me? Just checking if perfect.
Yes.
Hi. Thanks very much, Andrej, for the very interesting presentation. Actually, Liliana's question made me think of a problem that some people have, which is tinnitus, and they do constantly hear a noise or a whistle in their ear. Is that generated in the hearing channel, or is it coming from somewhere else? And what's the nature of it? You know?
That's a very nice question, and it's one of the answers that would take quite long to properly answer it. But there are very many types of tinnitus. Tinnitus just means you hear something that is not coming from an outer external sound wave. And there are types of tinnitus which can be, for example, synchronous to the heartbeat. These can be just vibrations that come from the blood vessels inside the head. Or you can have a tinnitus that are which are generated by the outer hair cells. You know, these cells who are able to dance. If they dance too much, they can even produce sounds. There was an anecdote on one of the conferences I attended where one of the professors told that he once had a patient with a dog who had tinnitus. So the dog had tinnitus. And it was possible to hear the sound that was generated in the ears of the dog. So the hair cells were dancing so loud that if you stand next to the dog, you could hear it. But these are very, very rare cases, and I'm not even sure if this is a true story or not. But it emphasizes what happens inside the inner ear, that you really generate sounds. And this is exploited for physicians, for example, when they measure if you can hear. The more common case is that tinnitus is generated in the brain, because like with most sensing abilities, the brain awaits signals. It expects that some information is coming in. And if this information is missing, for example, when you have a certain frequency range where you're deaf, you're not overall deaf, but just in a narrow frequency band you're deaf, then the brain doesn't get these signals anymore. And then it starts to produce its own signals. And it's not understood exactly, there are many theories on how it works, but it's not understood exactly why the brain does that. But apparently it happens. And usually such a tinnitus is connected to hearing loss, at least in a certain frequency range.
Great, thank you very much.
And as we've already been in the cochlea during your answer, there's one from YouTube from Edmund Morel, and he's asking whether hair cells can be protected anyway, like except for not listening to sound, but maybe by healthy living or good nutrition or...
So I told earlier that hair cells don't regrow, but there are repair processes, apparently. For example, if you go to a concert and you go back and you don't hear that well anymore, it comes back after hours or days. So there are repairing processes, and they also consume nutrition. So it is also very important to understand that the cochlea is heavily undersupplied, because every blood vessel in the vicinity would introduce sounds that we could perceive. So we want the cochlea to be sort of isolated acoustically from the rest, and therefore blood vessels are a bad thing there. So in consequence, that organ is undersupplied. And whenever we live unhealthy, we have a very stressful period, then it can happen that the organ takes damage, and it's one of the first organs in the body that take damage. So you heard probably, for example, that when somebody had a really stressful life, they can lose their ability to hear. That's the sudden hearing loss. And that could be explained by malnutrition because of the blood vessels that get tightened up, and the nutrition doesn't work anymore. So yes, you should live healthy to have healthy hair cells.
And the healthy rest of the body as well.
Yeah. Especially tinnitus is often modulated by a stiff neck, for example, or problems with the bones. It's a highly interconnected system, and it happens a lot that things where you would think it doesn't have a connection to hearing actually affects the ability to hear.
That's true. Now I was wondering, so you told us now about hearing, like in general, but this is probably not the topic that you're working on right now in your PhD research. But you told me you're doing something on the inner ear. Can you help us a little?
Sure. It's basic fundamental research, and what we want to know is how the mechanical properties of these outer hair cells are. How fast can they really be? That's still a not properly answered question, and there is even a discussion about how fast they really are. So what I do is, and what I did is to create a measurement setup that is able to measure these really tiny movements of outer hair cells. This works by 𝗠𝗂𝗶𝗵𝗺 video microscopy. It's more or less a very, very accurate microscope that is able to measure frequencies of movements that are as fast as 100 kHz or more. And the important thing is that these movements are really small. So it's just a nanometer or even a picometer. That's horribly small. It's nothing you can even see with light. But the nice thing is, with our setup, we can break this barrier and even measure movements that are much smaller than the wavelength of light. So I spent a lot of the time on the techniques how to measure outer hair cells. And the next step was to measure living outer hair cells and to check how fast they are, and feed models that explain how the movement of such outer hair cells are generated.
But just for me as an understanding, did you show us the outer hair cell dance? I could see the movement.
You couldn't see the movement?
Yeah, I could, but you said the movement's so small you couldn't even see it.
Yeah, that's right. Because the movement we saw earlier was something you wouldn't like to have in a living person. These were movements so big that probably the outer hair cell would already break. When it's in its natural mode, the movements are so small you wouldn't see them in the picture. Just as you don't see the vibrations when you I don't know, a surface of your table. When you talk, the table will start vibrate and conduct sounds, but you don't see the vibrations because they're really small. And there's a nice fun fact. At the softest sound we can perceive, our tympanic membrane is moving by just the amount of 1/10 of the diameter of a hydrogen atom. So these movements are so small, they are even smaller than the diameter of atoms. We're talking about really, really tiny movements here.
Wow. I mean, yeah, the ear is also a very tiny organ if you think about it. But yeah.
Oh, there is a factor of at least a million between that.
Okay.
The size of the organ and the size of the movements.
Okay. There was a question by Antonius. Please go.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. Actually, I wanted to ask exactly about the video with the hair cell, but I think you answered my question already. If that's right, like possible that you have this movement also, and because that was an isolated cell, right?
Yes, yes.
So I was wondering if that was really the real music and if it was that loud as we listen to it, and if this is exactly what happens in our ear. But I guess it's not.
It's similar. It's just a matter of scale. So there are two lies in this video. First is the one cell doesn't react to all of the frequencies. It reacts to just one frequency. And in the video, we saw it reacted to the beat. So yeah, what the person did, it was actually Jonathan Ashmore, a very, very famous professor in hearing research, who produced this video. And he took the 𝗁𝗂𝗶𝗵 of the sound and applied this as an electrical signal to the cell that is isolated. And when you generate a potential, like you charge up the cell, it will start to elongate. And he did it just in the right way as the volume profile of the music was. Understand? So he just took the volume at the specific moment and applied it as a signal to the cell. And then it reacts to the beat, just like as the lights in a disco.
Well, then I'm asking also, is there another way to manipulate these cells, either isolated or inside the ear, like with some medication or something, that we can cause movement in another way?
Yeah, there are several effects known. For example, you can take microwaves. If you take really strong electromagnetic fields, they can generate a heat inside the ear. And if you can take a fast pulse of microwaves, you can create like a very small sort of explosion on the inner ear. Nothing that hurts, but it is an explosion so small that it generates a sound wave, but doesn't really hurt the tissue. And by that one can generate at least click sounds. But I guess it's very difficult to produce really different or certain frequencies. I don't think that you have so much control over that. Another thing is to generate electrical signals inside the cochlea. For example, with cochlear implants, there you circumvent the inner hair cells, which are there to produce electrical signals. But you can also implant an electrode array into the cochlea and connect it to a microphone and a speech processor. And this would then translate incoming sound signals into electrical signals, which directly stimulate the nerve fibers of the hearing nerve. And this is done with people who are deaf, but still have an intact hearing nerve. So they get this device, perhaps you saw it once, it looks a little bit like a hearing aid with an electrode pad magnetically attached to the skull. And on the inner side, you have an implant through the cochlea with several electrodes sitting at different locations on the basilar membrane, which are all related to a different frequency. And if you switch on one of the electrodes, you will perceive something like a tone, but it's very far away from that, to be honest. But it is well enough to understand speech and to talk to other people if you're used to it.
So these methods are there studies that try to use these methods for treatment of different diseases, or not only for basic research?
No, this is something that is already quite common, and you get it paid by the health insurance in Germany. you can receive a cochlear implant if you are deaf, if you are have the properties to receive one.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Thanks. Then Jan, go for it.
Yeah. So out of curiosity, how do you technically observe the behavior of hair cells in living beings? I guess probably not humans at this point.
Yeah, this is possible by different techniques. For example, a quite modern technique is optical coherence tomography. It's a sort of tomography where you can really directly see through the tissue into the cochlea and see the movements. The resolution is not that good as if you would watch it directly, like an isolated cell on a microscope, but it's still enough to get a lot of information out of the living cochlea and without hurting too much in the animal. But there are also other ways which are used, for example, to really open the skull of a living animal and focus with a microscope on an opened cochlea.
And do their hearing systems actually work like ours? Like, do they also have like these tiny bones in the cochlea? What animal can you use? Can you use mice, or do you need to go for apes?
It depends on what you want to do. What works, or what is mostly done, is research on gerbils or cats or guinea pigs. Especially guinea pigs are interesting because they share the hearing range with us. They have a higher hearing range, but all the frequencies we have, they also have. And there is a not so nice fact that if you operate such an animal, you can easily cut out the cochlea there. And this is important because you don't have too much time to do research on the cells because they die fastly. But this structure, the cochlea itself and the ossicles, this is something all mammalian animals share and have in common. For example, the hearing of other species, from reptiles, for example, or birds, it works quite differently. They don't have inner and outer hair cells like us.
Okay. Okay. I think we will have like time for 2-3 more questions. And there's one from YouTube again, from 𝗍𝗿cie𝗴𝗵𝗺. He says that it indeed makes sense that the inner ear has little blood vessels so that we don't hear our heartbeat like very loud. But then he's wondering, how are the cells actually provided with nutrients and oxygen or energy in general?
This is a question I really like because first, we don't have blood vessels everywhere. We don't have blood vessels inside every cell. This doesn't work. We don't have, it's always a diffusion process. You have blood vessels in the vicinity, then the nutrients, they diffuse into the tissue and ultimately to the cells. And the path in the cochlea is just a little bit longer. It's diffusion in the end. But the other part of the question is, where does the energy come from? And this is very interesting because, they have these several tunnels inside the cochlea, which were separated by the basilar membrane. But this is also, for sake of simplicity, a lie, because actually there are 3 tunnels. And the 3rd tunnel is filled up with other nutrients and especially with other kinds of ions. And you can look at this system like as you look at a battery, because you have different ion concentrations that are connected through permeable membranes. There is a constant flow of ions from one into the other fluid-filled channel. And you also have a difference in electrical potential. So it's like a battery. And this is the battery that supplies the outer hair cells with their energy, because when they dance, they will also heat up, they will generate sound, and this is energy. So the energy is coming from the nutrients and the electric potentials that are generated by the ions in the fluid-filled channels.
Interesting. Okay. Okay, Edmund from YouTube is following up on our question on the animal sound systems. So he's wondering that, like, what other organs for sound perception do other animals have? Like, if they, for example, do have no cochlea, what else do they have? And I think you mentioned that, for example, birds have this very different sound system. So what do they use, for example?
Yeah, they don't. It looks totally different. I'm not an expert on this. You probably have to. Somebody else would be better suited for this answer. But they usually have types of hair cell similar like cells. So they have cells with some hairs on them that act like a valve for the inflowing ions. And the structures look totally different. But the idea that we have a tympanic membrane that is connected through ossicles to a fluid-filled cochlea, that's not the case there. They don't have the cochlea now.
Okay. Then I think, Lily, you have the honor to be the last one to ask the question.
Because I had a question about how do you keep these cell alive if they keep on dying, but then
Well,
it was already answered.
Was it? Now you're muted.
Oh well, because I wanted to find out how do you do research on these cells if they die, if they're so fragile, how can you take them out and keep them alive to study them? But I think Andrej already kind of answered this question.
Yeah, it takes, they are fragile and also consistent. I mean, surviving for quite a long time at the same time. But if you have the proper solution around the cells, they can live like half an hour or like that, an hour for measurements.
Only half an hour. You need to do your entire experiment in half an hour.
Yes.
Good luck.
So it's better if you stay with simulations than, as Andrej, I think, does. They will stay alive for longer. Okay, then I'll quickly say like 2 final words. Yes, it's actually some kind of sad news. So we, like, as we were forced by the pandemic to go from offline events to online events, we did so for quite some months, but we feel like we're all kind of online Zoom meeting tired, and this is why we decided to pause our online events until we can go back to offline again. And so this actually was our last Chit-Chat session for now. Thank you, Andrej, for being part of this.
Thank you for having me.
But yeah, still, if you want, stay tuned for more sciencey content on all of our platforms. And actually, if you want to help us to create different formats that are maybe better suited for the pandemic now, we will post a form in the chat right now. You can also find it on Facebook or Instagram. And there you can help us find a format that you will enjoy as well. And until we see us in a new format, maybe, we'd love to see you around on our social media channels and maybe interact with us there. And then with this, it's only left to say, have a nice Christmas, Hanukkah, winter break, whatever you're going to celebrate or not celebrate in December. Have a happy new year, and we'll see each other back in 2021. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and we'll hope to have you back as an audience someday. Bye-bye.